because I think a lot of the things we require in pre-registration course seems not to be perfectly aligned with what Janet was recommended. So I think one thing I want to say is that pre-registration is a work in progress. It's a new format that just is fairly new. I think probably not more than 3-4 years. And as we go along, we think and we discover and we negotiate and we learn a lot of new things. So what I think we're trying to achieve as a community or as the people who are trying to offer a change is that we really want it to be more as a dialogue. I mean, it's not like a black box that you send a paper to a pre-registered editors and they know everything they need to know and make a decision based on some kind of absolute truth, because we don't have the absolute truth, yeah? So the more feedback we get from a community on good practices and what they think we should do, the better we can make the format work for everyone. So before I'm going to start, I'm just going to obviously acknowledge. So I'm an editor in Cortex, and I'm one of the triage editor for Register Report. And this is the team. So it's a very, very much a teamwork in Cortex. And most of the talk that I'm going to talk about are going to be based on my experience in Cortex, and I'm going to try and make it personal as well, and also try and ask your opinion as we go along. But obviously the leading force of the whole idea of registering report is Christopher Chambers, and he's the head lead of the Register Report format, and he's the spirit behind it. We have a statistician, which seems to be massively useful. So that's Zoltan Daines, and I think a lot of journals these days seem to want this. For us, at least, as Register Report, because we're considering quite heavily the methods and the power, having a statistician on board is really, really helpful to get an advice and to give an advice for the author. And then there are the two cognitivist neuroscience people, which is Rob, Klaus, and me. I think Klaus have abandoned us, so it's just Rob now these days, and me. Okay, so a bit of my beginning of the talk will be repeating Cyril, just in different words. So there was a really nice workshop run in Amsterdam a couple of years back, and they basically highlighted the problem. And I think given the political and culture atmosphere we're living in today, this problem is magnified beyond science and also into science. So this paper just basically summarized the workshop and summarized all the problems that arise and basically the big conflict between where we want to achieve or where we want to end as individual, or where we are expected to end as individual in our career, as opposed to what science is all about. And one of the interesting things they highlighted is that because there is such a big push in our culture in general, which also affect politics in general and also science, there's so much information, so the information have to be very, very concise and brief, and we're all going back to tweets, and tweets have become to be the new bon ton of exchanging information, both scientifically, academically, and politically. We tend to massively oversimplify things, which will have a price in our ability to actually acquire new knowledge and validate our knowledge and check its reliability. So it's a very well paper to read. So what am I going to talk about today? So as I said, I'm going to revisit what Cyril said. So it's a problem with everyday research practice in psychology and cognitive neuroscience, but obviously it's also a problem in medical, and I gave a talk to a bunch of editors from Lancet or other editorial journal, and it's a real big problem that worries them as well, and I think it worries most of scientific fields. And then I'm going to present the idea of the study pre-registration and how we think it can help. I mean, it's obviously not the only things, and it's not a holy grail, but it's just one way to move forward. And then I want to have a bit of discussion as what we think can count as an hypothesis in neuroimaging study. And again, I think what Janet said was very interesting, because I gave a talk and we had quite an intensive debate on what is a relevant hypothesis in neuroimaging. And I would say I don't know the answer, so it would be interesting to hear what people think. And then if we have time, there's a lot of frequently asked questions regarding register report, which I will just go through. But if we don't have time, you can just look at them on the web. And then the other thing I want to say that most of the talk is plagiarized from Chris Chambers' talk. So I admit plagiarism. Okay, so what is the problem? So in the interest of doing good science, which is the part of the study that should be beyond our control, and that's obviously the results. However, in the interest of advancing your personal career, which part of the research study is most important for publishing in top journals? And it's obviously the results. So could this be why Eliant might be flying right by us? So the result seems to be involving conflicting interest here. So for best science, we want transparent and high quality research, regardless of the outcome. But for the best individual scientist, we really want to have a lot of good results, because one groundbreaking paper in Nature or Science can pave your career and you can lay back and relax. So, and that's only will come if you have good results. It's not going to come. You can do hundreds and hundreds of excellent studies and work very hard, but if you didn't get this really exciting, groundbreaking, unexpected result, you just trod along. So what is a good result? So it have to be novel, it have to be striking, it have to be clear, it have to be pretty simple. You should be able to summarize it in a page or 2 pages and have one sentence describing it to people. And I think, but one of the things as a scientist, so this is a double edge, it's a criticism, but it's true that if the paper is too complex to understand, it's not going to have an impact. So while we can criticize simplicity will also have a value in terms of the ability to actually understand what the study is about and communicate it. You need to have this magical significant effect, which is just a convention that we have agreed and seem to be sticking to it quite strongly, which is this 0.05 magic number. Your experiment need to work. The results have to be convincing. So the description should match what you're saying. You should massively advance the field, yeah? And it should be clear and definitive, so no question asked. It should be beautiful, it should be a breakthrough, and it should obviously have high impact and of the interest of the lot. So given that we are working with a bunch of extremely intelligent people, so all these intelligent people have come out with a lot of intelligent and creative solutions to make these results work. So in every step of the way, you can find a person that can make the result work. So Cyril talked about the publication bias. So you're basically going to only publish results that are positive, and we're going to ignore or suppress or write in small letters the results that are negative because they're not that interesting. Or if they're too complex, we're going to try and simplify it. So we're going to do the significant chasing because we need this magical number, otherwise it's not going to fly. Because the story have to be clear and convincing, we usually try to reboost our hypothesis after we find the result to make it all streamline nicely from the introduction to the method to the result of the discussion, because otherwise it's quite confusing to read. There's a problem with data sharing, so if we don't share the data, nobody really can challenge us. And then we run a lot of low statistical power. So because a lot of statistical power, it's very difficult. The result could just be by chance. And I think, I mean, it's interesting what Janet said, but as a neuroimaging, it's very expensive to run a study with 100, 200, 500 people. So that's a real big problem, which I think we face on a daily basis in Register Report. How to basically balance power in terms of research and still keep the science machine going. And yeah, there's a lack of replication because replication seems to be boring, not creative, not advancing really the field. So here is the slide that Cyril promised that will come up. So here it came up again. So this is basically the positivist approach to science, which I think Popper have proposed. And in every step of the way, there is a way to basically overcome that to overcome and play with the data to make it to work for you. So Cyril talked about the replication crisis. Janet talked about, or just mentioned at least, the low statistical power that a lot of studies run, or the ability to try and have a power. We need to chase significance results. We do harking or sharking, and we obviously just tend to report results that are significant and positive, because negative results don't really interest anybody, and it's not big news. Okay, so why is this happening? So I think Chris Chambers' philosophy will say it's because we place too much importance on the result and the experiment and not enough on the process and the methods. So when we read the study as a reviewer, or when we evaluate the study as a reviewer, we really just look at the results and the method and the discussion, and we're very much biased by it, rather than carefully looking at the methods. And the result is what makes science exciting, but actually judging the quality of the science and the scientist according to the result may be soft science, because maybe what's much more important than the result is the method section. So in register report, the idea is to emphasize on basically the method. So basically the method is the one that is being reviewed rather than the result. So we look at what is the question that is being asked, what is the quality of the method that is proposed to answer the questions, and the results are not relevant to the register report because everything happened before the experiment was conducted. So in that sense, all the spotlight is put on the methods and the theory that led to that methods, rather than the result itself. And if we accept this philosophy, then editorial decision at the journal should be really blind to the result to avoid this biasing. So these are basically the four central aspects of the register report. So researchers decide the hypothesis, experimental procedure, and main analysis before they collect the data. Part of the peer review process takes place before the experiments are conducted, so the review is on the method and the introduction, not on the result. And passing this stage, the review virtually guarantees publication. Yeah, so if you pass this stage of the review of your method and introduction, then basically you get in principle accepted for publication, and it doesn't really matter what your results are, whether they're positive or negative, whether they're simple or complex. And the format invite both original studies and replication studies at different levels of reputation. So how does it work? So at the first stage, the authors submit a paper, which is basically just the introduction and the method. Usually this paper goes through editorial triage, which is us four, which read the paper. And what the things we are looking at is first is the paper is clear, is it very clear what the author want to achieve? Are the methods, and the hypotheses are well founded by the literature, although in terms of the theoretical value of the hypothesis, we often leave it to the reviewers. Is the methods proposed and the analysis are feasible and clearly enough defined in terms of inclusion and exclusion criteria, expected retention rate? Is it really everything is realistic? And is the study well powered? So I want to focus on the study well powered, especially given that Janet have said it's unrealistic. So it's interesting because we do insist on 90% power or on a base factor analysis. So maybe we need to revisit it, but I think that the rationale is that if we guarantee your publication, we really want to make sure that even a null result is meaningful. And without making sure that you have enough power to detect an effect, or you have enough power to have a meaningful null result, then your publication will be meaningless to the reader, because we don't want you to end by saying, oh, maybe I didn't have enough power, but nevertheless publish you. So we definitely insist on 90% power, and we would send author back to find the resource. Saying that, if it's an imaging study, we know it's expensive study to run, we do seem to be a bit more relaxed. So we do saying, okay, so put at least a high cutoffs of how many participants you can absolutely maximum collect, and we'll aim to do that. So we are minded to resources, but we do try, if we think the resources are there, if it's a simple EEG study, which we don't think is very expensive, or a simple behavior study, which is not very expensive, we will expect you to have a 90% power. And we will push for that. And I think there was a paper now that's coming back to stage 1, and still they're at 80% power, and they will still go back to say, no, find additional study to at least get your power on the right track. But this is an issue that we keep looking at. Yeah, so the power is a big issue in register report, because we guarantee you a publication, we really want it to be meaningful, whether you get a result or not. So this stage is typically, I think the editorial board try to basically review the paper within a week or so. So we kind of have quite a big turnout. I would say 70% of the papers are being sent back to the author at that stage to basically either work on the power, to work on the methods, to make it clearer, to clarify things. Another very, very important thing for register report is to include a neutral outcome condition. So a neutral outcome condition is basically a condition that guarantees that your experimental manipulation works, and to a degree also guarantee that your data quality is okay. So I think a lot of us, when we do imaging, we always implicitly have a neutral condition in our head. So for example, if you do an experiment with visual stimuli, you always check visual versus nothing. Do I get the whole visual cortex light up like crazy? If I didn't, probably my code is wrong. Yeah, so we do have an embedded neutral condition in our head to check that our result makes sense at some, so everything went well to a degree, but we just want you to make it very, very explicit. What is your neutral outcome condition, that if this didn't work, then there is a high likelihood that nothing really worked in your experiment, or the quality of the data is bad, or your experimental manipulation did not work as you would expect. Okay, so if all goes well, then that's, so about a week, you take it back, depending on how many comments. So that iteration can last for a while, and it's all depending on the level of the submitted paper and how much it was clearly. So I think out of the 44 we so far received, there was only 5 paper who was immediately went through the editorial board and to the stage 1 report. So stage 1 is just literally a peer review. So we basically send it to the reviewer outside, external reviewers, and it's just a normal review process, like as if it was a normal paper. I think for the reviewers, it's an easier job because you just have the introduction method to look at. So the paper is much shorter. It's also quite rewarding for the reviewer because you can actually make concrete suggestions. So I think both authors and reviewer, just from subjectively looking at it, find the whole process extremely beneficial, because both the reviewers and the editor would highlight potential points and potential confound to make your whole quality of experiment much better than it was had you just run it as you thought in advance. So, and also the reviewer feel that they can actually have an impact on the study before it was actually conducted. So at all these stages, you're not starting with data collection, but you're just finalizing and fine-tuning your design and your analysis. And if everybody are happy by the end of this peer review process, then you're being granted in principal acceptance, and you start collecting the data. And I think we so far, from all the 44, we have about 18 papers that have granted in principal accepted, and the rest are somewhere in the channel. And we have 1 paper that was rejected after the first stage review, because this paper, just the theory didn't hold. So the hypothesis they were putting forward was not, did not match the theoretical claim they wanted to make. So, and we're starting, I think at the beginning we were a bit lenient till the format catching, but we're starting to be slightly more restrictive and conservative in our acceptance. So this whole process may take a while because it's like almost like a normal review. And I think one of the things that may put people off is that because once you have your experiment in mind and once you have your ethical approval, you really want to go run with it. But we actually ask you, no, wait. And that could be up to 1 month, 2 months, depending on how many changes the reviewer want and how many changes the editor want and what's the level of your experiment. And and it could be frustrating because we could really hold you back from beginning the starting of the data collection. But I think one of the, and I find it difficult personally, if I'm thinking of registering a report, I find it, oh my God, now I have to wait another half a year before I start data collection. That will take forever. But I need to change. When I think, and one of the things to think about is that, so if you run an experiment and collect your data, you anyway have a half a year waiting period when you try to publish it. So instead of doing it after you collect the data, you do it before you collect the data. And so it's just a matter of realigning your thinking and realigning your time frame. So I think at the end of the day, you end up publishing the experiment at the same time from start to end, but the waiting time is at a time that we actually really want to start going, but we need to wait. Okay, so after you start going, so the authors do the research, and then once they finish the research, they resubmit it again as a new publication, as a stage 2 publication, and it's go back to the original reviewers, and it's go back to the editorial team. In that case, the introduction method doesn't change, and then the just results are added. And then there's a new discussion, and then they have to also upload all the data to be shared, all the code, all the lab books, everything have to be uploaded and have to be extremely organized. And I think Pierre and Carmen will talk about this aspect on how to do that very organized. We recently had an issue with the author that's saying that their data is too big to be uploaded. I think it was more than 0.5 tera for the whole study. But I think we will be looking to help you. So we'll be looking to help find places and resources to basically upload the data and enable it to upload it. So in stage 2, basically, it's the same reviewers, and they just basically will be looking mostly whether you've done what you were supposed to be doing, whether your outcome neutral result was as expected, and then the manuscript just get published. And I think majority of the manuscript just got published. We just have now manuscript in the pipeline that there was a tiny bit of alteration in the way they run the experiment to select the data. And there's a lot of debate around what we're going to do with them, but they nevertheless went to the review. This was brought back to the author to say, look, you didn't do what was on the tin, and we need to make a decision how to go about it. And I think we'll try and make a decision together with the reviewers when we come to it. Okay. So far we have around 8 fully published. So I just want to give you 2 examples of 2 register reports that related to imaging. So one is an MEG study. So that was a fairly straightforward MEG study. So basically they wanted to look whether AMPA blockers, so there's a big debate in MEG, what drive gamma oscillation. And they wanted to look whether if they use MMPA blockers, they can alter gamma oscillation. So the question was fairly straightforward. It was almost a one sample t-test, but you have the MEG data there, so it's immediately magnified because you can analyze it based on frequency. There's different time domains, there's different spatial, but relatively the question was simple. And I think what worked well for them is that it was a very high risk and costly study because it was MEG and it was involving drug, so it was a lot of effort from the point of view of the author. And it's quite reassuring to know that if you're going to put all this effort, you're going to get a publication out of it for sure. It doesn't really matter what you get. So I think a register report is really useful for people who are going to do really high risk and costly studies, because we can just guarantee that whether it works or not works, we're going to publish it, as long as you have the power. And the theoretical question was really straightforward. There were little issues on how much drugs to give at the beginning, which we kind of debated, and how will they decide. And again, what should be the outcome neutral criteria. So interestingly, in that study, the outcome neutral criteria didn't really work because the outcome neutral criteria was about the subjective report of the subject, but the subject didn't report any subjective change in their experience following the drug or the placebo. But the experiment did show results, so we did go with it at the end. Another issue that came about is that the reviewer was not happy with the results. So even though the author fulfilled all the criteria and did all what they said, the reviewer just didn't believe the result. And one of the things we've done, and I think that's again something that Register Report offering, which was very transparent, is we told the author that, fine, what we suggest he can do is, given that he has the data, because he suggested a lot of new analysis to show that what he's saying is correct, is that given that the data is shared, he is welcome to reanalyze the data the way he wanted, and we will guarantee that it will be published alongside a response for the author if he wants to challenge or to show that an absence of result was because of the analysis rather than because of they're not really there. So I think this Register Report and all the discussion that goes around it just really increase the transparency and create platform of sharing and constructive discussion between authors and reviewers and the community in general. So a second study that was that we edited, so that was a much more challenging study, and I'm not sure if we would have edited today, we would have let it go through so easily. So this was an fMRI study. It was very, very complex. And also the results were very complex, but a lot of it was because the methods was not specified as good in the beginning. So the theoretical questions were really complex, so they wanted to look at whether a feature or category-based organization in the brain in terms of knowledge. And they also wanted to say that they only make a conclusion whether it's feature or category using two analysis methods. One is basically item-based, and the second will be based on subject. And then they also wanted two regions of interest. One will be the anterior temporal, and the second one will be the temporal parietal. And the issues they were asking we had is, first of all, how are we going to define the region of interest in advance? And what if only part of the result supported the hypothesis? We also how specific the hypothesis might to be, what would be a neutral outcome to assess the data. And one of the things that came back at stage 2 is that the author tend to ignore null results because they didn't support the hypothesis. So they were basically forced to put all the results back from the original hypothesis, whether it supported or not supported the hypothesis. And we also had the issue of how you're going to report the whole result of the whole brain analysis, because it ended up that the most interesting result they had is actually from a whole brain analysis rather than from the region of interest. So there was a lot of little complication there that have to be thought, which we should probably have thought of them in stage 1. But I think what is important is that the things that will guarantee your publication is not whether the hypothesis is supported by result. It's not whether you reach the magical significant number. It's not whether the results are novel, and it's not whether the result will have any impact. But what is important is that the hypotheses are clear, the study is powered, the method is sound, and the quality of the data is good. So that's what will guarantee your publication. So we're trying to offset the biases toward the result by that. So this is something that I really will favor your opinion. What is an acceptable hypothesis for imaging studies? So Janet here said that all her power analysis is really meaningful for ROI. Yoko will say have a power analysis for whole brain. So is a meaningful hypothesis for imaging study, be it EEG, MEG, or fMRI, given that we have so many measures, is my experiment will lead to a change in activation, any change, be it in activation, be it in connectivity, be it in oscillation, anywhere in the brain. As long as I correct for it and I do family-wise error correction, it's a fine hypothesis to have. Or we should have a more specific hypothesis regarding my experiment will affect a specific functional or anatomical structure in the brain. Does people have an opinion? But would you think it's, I mean, so my intuition was, yeah, I mean, I think right. So my intuition was that we need at least some hypothesis on functional or anatomical structures because we know something about the brain. So just having something multiple family-wise error-corrected is not going to solve the problem. But I've been massively argued by people when I gave this presentation, saying if it's family-wise error-corrected, it's fine. We can have a voxel anyway. It doesn't really matter as long as it's family-wise error-corrected. It's count as you can reject your null hypothesis. So it will be interesting to hear what people think. Another thing is that, again, because imaging includes so many measurement, and we rarely focus on all the things we measure, what should we actually report at the end of the day in terms of just the description of the data to give a fairly good description? So it's true that if we're able to share our maps, we can, people can just go and look, but how many people don't often just go and look in the maps unless they have a really, really specific interest. So in SPM at least, and in FSL as well, I mean, they kind of introduce this culture of reporting a table of results. So you report the table of all your picks and cluster. But if you're going to do a very specific guided hypothesis for a region of interest, you may not end up reporting all the results and cluster that you see in your activation. So the question is, shall you really just focus on your region of interest, as some people and some studies doing, or shall we really try and enforce people to include a table of a descriptive of some sort, even though it's not related directly to the hypothesis, but it will be for benefit of bigger meta-analysis. So these are kind of the things that we are debating in ourselves. Okay, some frequently asked questions. How much? 0. So no frequently asked questions.